The Island of Dr Moreau, which I hope I'm pronouncing correctly, by H.G. Wells. This was an interesting little book, to be sure. It's little, it's only 191 pages. It is, however, well, okay, so it's written in 1896. So it's late 1800s writing, and you're either going to like that style of writing or you're not. If you don't like things that were written in the late 1800s or very early 1900s, you're probably not going to deal with the language, the assumptions, the whole core story of this particularly well, but I did enjoy it. So H.G. Wells is heralded by some as the father of science fiction. Hang on, we'll just zoom in on that rather nice little illustration there. You may have difficulty in seeing that that's a beast wrapped around in bandages or ropes. I'm inclined to think bandages, with a little bit of a jungle setting. I picked up this book and The War of the Worlds a while back. They're nice little old style school penguins with the cover art that I really like. I had previously had The War of the Worlds with a epoxy cover made from that idiotic movie, most recent movie that I really didn't enjoy. So yes, I read this partly because I was watching a review of another YouTuber, and it's been on my to read shelf for a while and kind of spurred me on to read it. It is beautifully written in the style of the late 1800s. It's got that beautiful flow to it. So let me read just a bit of it. The reader will perhaps understand that at first everything was so strange about me, and my position was the outcome of such unexpected adventures that I had no discernment of the relative strangeness of this or that thing about me. That's the kind of writing it is, and you'll like it or you won't. Now, H.G. Wells as the father of science fiction, I think that's something that lots of people are going to debate. A lot of people are going to say that science fiction as a genre didn't really exist until the 50s, and when magazines popularized it, or periodicals popularized it. So in that case, this was before sci-fi existed as a genre. It would have been published as a mainstream fiction, work of fiction. H.G. Wells wrote a lot during his lifetime. He wrote fiction to begin with. He wrote more and more non-fiction as he grew older. It's an adventure story. So Wikipedia claims that this remains one of Wells's best known books, which really surprised me because I hadn't heard of it. I find it difficult to imagine that The Island of Dr Moreau would be more popular to the average reader than, say, War of the Worlds or The Time Machine. I could be wrong about that. When you look through the list of things that have been inspired by it, they're significant. I feel that they've used the name The Island of Dr Moreau without in any way actually referencing the contents of this book in many occasions. There have also been two movies, one in the 70s and one in the 90s. I'm not sure that even modern CGI is up to some of the things that you would need to CGI in this book, so I expect they're not very good. I've resisted the urge to see any of those snippets before reviewing this book. So is this a classic that everyone knows? I don't know about that. So the novel is considered one of the earliest depictions of the sci-fi motif of uplift. Again, according to Wikipedia, which interested me because I've just recently started David Brin's Uplift series, which I really am enjoying. So the notion is good. The modern reader may need the power of Google with them in order to really get through this. And my first hurdle was on page 14, and even with Google, I didn't really get it. So there's a ship name, it's called Ipecacunaha. I don't know. I don't know what's happening there. Something South American. Apparently there's a vomit route in South America named that. I don't understand. A reference was made to how it was opportune to the ship. I'm sure it made sense to H.G. Wells and his readers. Maybe you can follow that. I'm guessing maybe it's meant to indicate that when the ship's underway but it doesn't have enough sail or wind in the sail, then it wallows and that causes people to vomit. Maybe? There's many things about this. Later in the book, there is a reference to him having been educated after solged, something like that. And I think that's meant to be talking about an educational system of handcraft-based things, but it started in Finland, and yeah, I don't know. A lot of this, I just don't know. Now, one of the main things that I really never followed with this was where exactly we were meant to be. I like travel. I like following ocean journeys. This one did my head in a big way. And it's minor to the plot. My recommendation is, if you're reading this, don't even try to go there. Just accept that it's in magic 1800s La La Land and move on from there. But I didn't do that. So we start on a ship called the Lady Vane that was lost. We start off with an introduction in which someone says he's the nephew of a nephew called Charles Edward Prendick. Okay. And he found these writings in among his uncle's papers, and he's publishing them as he thinks his uncle might be. His uncle was shipwrecked from the Lady Vane and then was discovered floating in a lifeboat from a different ship 12 months later. And at this point, we're getting strong Robert Louis Stevenson's vibes. So Robert Louis Stevenson, who wrote around about the same time, or just a bit before, he was writing things like Treasure Island, Kidnapped, and all of those really exciting things that were very much the flavour of the times. He also wrote the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I think Wells and Robert Louis Stevenson had a lot of interests in common. And I think that's what H.G. Wells was trying to do here. Now, a lot of those early sea voyage type travel logs and adventures suffered from a lack of understanding of the places they were talking about. Stevenson as well, but I think Wells is worse. I can't find any indication that Wells ever left England, and that shows. So we start off on the Lady Vane, which he embarked on in Peru, and then he's sailing somewhere undetermined, and it gets shipwrecked, and he's picked up from the dinghy by a ship that is traveling from Africa to an island in the South Pacific. There is the classic 1800s indication that the person who is writing this coral island knows nothing about corals or coral islands and is just getting away with the world's coral and jungle. So there's that. But whatever, that's fine. Then he ends up back at sea and he's picked up by a ship that's going from Apia, that's Samoa, to San Francisco. And I'm not even going to ask why a ship is doing that. But he's picked up somewhere around the Galapagos, and it did my head in so badly. I'm trying to figure out these places and how come there's a puma on board if he was picking up animals from Africa in this ship. Oh my God. Just don't do that. Magic La La Land, ignore the maps. If you can do that, it ends up being a really intriguing little novel. So this Mr. Pendrake, not Pendrake, I wish it was Pendrick, Prendick. Okay, Prendick. It was picked up out of a dinghy who was at death's door. Luckily, there was a medical man on board this ship. This ship is crazy mess, and it's dirty, and it's full of animals. The captain's a red-headed drunk. This is all the Epicunia or whatever, the vomit ship, whatever, Wells, whatever. So this medical man sort of nurses him back to health. Montgomery, his name is. And then they finally arrive at this mysterious small island that he's living on. He disembarks with all the animals. But our hero is cast adrift in a tiny dinghy by the captain, who doesn't want to barb him or Montgomery or any of his animals or any of his weirdness anymore. And he ends up being picked up and taken to the island. The island, of course, is the island of Dr. Moreau, who is committing a whole heap of different surgeries and biological experimentation under the name of vivisection. So, when this was written, there was a whole heap of controversy around vivisection. I know that about it, and I know that Wells was a bit of a progressive thinker in that he was pro-pacifism and a few other things that weren't really common in his era. So this is kind of an anti-vivisection thing. There's strong themes of human interference with nature, moral responsibility. What is a human versus an animal? And this was written in the 1800s, so all animals are vile and evil and bestial, and that doesn't work for me particularly well, but the fact that H.G. Wells knew nothing about zoology in the era in question shouldn't be too surprising. The writing is beautiful. The story is not bad if you can deal with the era in which it was written. So here come the spoilers, and there are a lot of them, but I mean, they're all on the internet as well. If you're thinking of reading this, you'll probably check it out. So Edward Prendick, he has scientific background, so he's a bit more acceptable to Dr. Moreau and Montgomery when he's landed there. He slowly realizes that all these animals, all these bestial natives, as he thinks of them to begin with, are not actually natives, and he conceives a horrible notion of what Dr. Moreau is doing, that he's experimenting on humans and creating these bestial natives. There's a sequence with him dashing around the island madly, and finally Moreau and Montgomery get him back and explain that what he's actually doing is he's taking animals and he's using vivisection or biological engineering basically to turn them human-like. But then his experiments keep failing, and that the animals keep reverting to animalism, which of course is bestial and evil and horrible, after a certain amount of time. So begin 2 months in which he is the guest of Dr. Moreau. He abhors the bestial nature of the experiments. This dashing around the island, by the way, is because Moreau starts working on the puma, and though they clearly have means of knocking people out, he does it while they're fully conscious, so screams of pain echo through the compound, which leads him to run away. Now, the big problem with the early part of this novel for me is I don't really love main heroes who do stupid stuff. If they behave like they've had their brain surgically removed, I don't really enjoy them as heroes. Now, I have heard Island of Dr. Moreau compared to the much earlier Frankenstein. Was it 1818 that Shelley wrote that? I don't like Frankenstein. I think it's a bad book. I thoroughly enjoy it. If you're going to go for an early biological science one, I'd definitely recommend the writing of H.G. Wells over Shelley's. Shelley has a main character that is even dumber than the one in this one, and this one has a lot more science to it, and a lot more exploration of humanity and human themes, I would say. The beast men, or the men beasts, or whatever you want to call them, have created their own form of society, and they've got virtually a religion. So there's the law which they must obey, which is to be more manlike. And Montgomery explains to our hero, Prendick, that this has been implanted into them surgically by Dr. Moreau. So we're looking at brainwashing or programming as well. There's a lot of central themes here that are very much modern themes of science fiction, and though they're being used under different names, it's actually quite impressive how many he's got here. So the beasts have got their law, and they're subservient to Montgomery and Dr. Moreau, who try to keep them more human-like by keeping them away from doing bestial things such as, let's see, not going on all fours, not lapping from streams, not to eat fish or flesh, not to claw at bark of trees, not to kill and eat other beastmen. There's a whole heap. Oh, I should mention also, these beastmen aren't straight beastmen, so you don't have a puma woman straight. You do, I think, at one stage, but mostly they're combined. So you've got hyena and swine combined to make a single animal. You've got bears and dogs combined to make a single animal. So you've got a lot of interesting stuff. Now, the first we learn about them reverting is a leopard man who briefly chases our hero Prendick when he first escapes the compound, and they end up hunting him down because he's reverted. Now, after 2 months of this very slow start, we finally reach the meat of the matter where actual events start happening. And that's something I noticed in another one of Wells' books. It might have been, it was probably The Time Machine, actually. For all of this book, by far the majority is setting it up. So about 2/3 is setting up, and then you've got a little bit of story, and then you've got the end. It's not a bad style of writing, but it wasn't one that I loved when I was a child. Now, I first encountered H.G. Wells early on. My parents must have loved him. There was H.G. Wells right next to John Wyndham on the bookshelf. I much prefer Wyndham myself as an author. The slowness in the beginning, combined with the lack of logical behavior by the protagonist, I think are the main issues with this. But as an adult, I can enjoy the beauty of the writing and the forward thinking of the narrative and the points it's making. So after the long slow build up, which all occurs in 2 months, a major catastrophic event occurs. The puma woman that Dr. Moreau has been working on breaks free. He kills her, she kills him. There's no more Dr. Moreau, who is the core essence of the laws and religion that the beastmen have built for themselves. Montgomery's got an issue. He's living there in the first place because he had a major indiscretion back in London, which he doesn't talk about, when he was a medical student. And he's a drunk, which H.G. Wells, or at least Prendick, seem to vilely condemn. He goes off the rails. He ends up dead as well. So you've got Prendick living, as he says, for 12 months among the beastmen, but we only get a few pages of that. He doesn't want to detail what happened there. Then, finally, his most devoted beastman follower dies, and a little boat comes ashore, which may or may not have had... it's got 2 dead people in it. That may or may not have been from the vomit ship, who's Kapapaka, whatever. And he gets in that, he drifts away, and he's rescued by another ship, goes back to England, has difficulty reintegrating. There's a very fascinating little section on PTSD, long before PTSD existed, about his ability to reintegrate and the use of a mental care professional in helping him. So many concepts here that are actually quite good. So Wells himself early specialised in biology, apparently. I don't know if he studied under Huxley, his protagonist did. And he had ethical thinking on the subject of biology. He was strongly within the Darwinian context. And at that stage, there was a belief in the ability of animals to revert. That belief didn't really go out until the 60s or the 70s, but it's a very central one to the beasts that Dr. Moreau has experimented on. First published in 1896, says the cover, H.G. Wells' novel is a chill warning of the dangers of science run riot. Oh! It recalls much later classics as Brave New World and Lord of the Flies. I guess, if you want. I didn't much care for Lord of the Flies when I last read it. And I think Brave New World was much more about society, and this was much more about biology, and a lot more about the ethics of what you can do, but should we? Because the protagonist frequently makes the point that Dr. Moreau isn't actually seeking to advance science or learn techniques. He doesn't care. He has no actual human feeling for the pain of the beast that is causing the beasts, or the redundancy of what he's doing. So you could really look at Dr. Moreau as a bit of a psychopath in terms of completely lacking empathy for other creatures. So yes, one tiny book jam-packed full of biological science fiction and concepts that are really, really interesting. I'm glad I've got this copy. I'm pretty sure I'm going to want to reread this in a couple of years after I've had time to stew over what I actually think about it. Yeah, and now I can go off and watch a couple of skits from the movies, which I expect to be appallingly bad, and maybe read a few more reviews, see what other people thought of it. I definitely think that it's worth reading if you can cope with the 1800s style. It's certainly not your classic sci-fi, but it's very much a precursor to sci-fi, and you've got to wonder, if you didn't have authors like H.G. Wells writing in the late 1800s, early 1900s, how much of what we now know as the 1950s sci-fi would have actually come into being. I believe Wells died just before 1950s, brought sci-fi in, but a huge number of people credit him as being a major influence. Anyway, thank you for watching. If you've read The Island of Dr. Moreau, I would love to hear from you. If you haven't, maybe consider going out and reading it, if what I've said sounds intriguing. But if not, find another book that is a good book and will make you think about science fiction, or about biology, or about the world and the oceans of the world, and why you had ferries going from Samoa to San Francisco through the Galapagos Islands. That one still gets me. And how you got from Africa to a puma to the South Seas of the Pacific without going around the bottom of South America, which would be noteworthy, or Australia, roaring 40s, or, who's overthinking it? Go away, read good books. Thank you for watching.